everyone, Hamer back with another Mission Impossible episode review. This time I've got Season 5, Episode 16, which is called The Missile. So this one starts with what I think is recycled footage, with Jim taking the blue convertible to a small shack near a port. The mission is simple. Enemy agent James Reed has a plan to steal a rocket guidance system, and the IMF must make sure he steals a bogus one. So Jim shows up to the weapons testing center where the guidance system is and meets Reed's contact, Doris Gordon. They haven't actually seen each other before. So using spy speak, he impersonates Reed, and Doris implicates herself as Reed's contact. So she's put under arrest. Her boss, Willard, demands to know what's going on, and Jim tells him that they know that he and Doris are having an affair. But he's a family man, and he was going to be set up for blackmail, so he's being reassigned. Jim and the station commander go to see the rocket, and Jim replaces a guidance controller for Reed to steal. Jim takes Willard's place, and Dana stands in for Doris. After work, Dana has car trouble and stops at a repair shop, where she gets a quick fix, and one of the workers looks at her strangely, calling her Marlene, and following her to her apartment as she leaves, checking out the car's registration. Dana comes back to her apartment to find Reed waiting for her, and they exchange the pre-planned spy speak. Dana tells him that everything is set for tomorrow, shows him a bunch of love letters from Willard, and the IMF gets Mr. Willard's young son to go along with the charade of convincing Reed of Willard's devotion to his family, so that the blackmail will certainly work. Reed is somewhat unconvinced and tells Dana he wants pictures of the two together. As the IMF anticipated, Reed has taken the apartment next to Dana's, and Jim gets Paris to keep an eye on. Dana returns to the garage to get the proper part for her car, and the creepy John Hecker says hi to her as she gets the car fixed for a whopping $1.75, which is, interestingly enough, as much as a liter of gas costs in Canada today. I had to buy gas, that's how I know. Reed and his colleague Farrell set up a two-way mirror into the apartment, and Jim arrives soon afterwards for a brief makeout session and to allay Doris's fears that he'll be transferred. After it's done, Dana talks to Reed about her concern that Willard will confess out of guilt, but Reed assures her that he will arrange a fatal accident to make sure that doesn't happen. Willie and Barney follow Farrell to a photo lab where he develops his prints and sets up some traps around the lab. Reed confronts Jim with the pictures, and he acts predictably devastated, but allows himself to be convinced to cooperate, for his kid's sake. Jim demands the film negatives, and Reed tells him he'll get them after the job is done. When Farrell leaves the lab, Barney and Willie head in to check it out in an effort to prevent Jim from being caught in the trap. But when Barney opens the heavy main lab door, it slams shut behind him, and the chemicals set up by Farrell start burning. Willie is able to use his strength to break the massive door, or open it, move it out of the way, whatever you want to say. Barney calls Jim to tell him about what Reed had planned and that he and Willie are setting up an escape for him. Jim is a bit skeptical about it, but they have no choice but to let the plan play out. Reed comes to Dana's apartment, where, unbeknownst to all, Hecker is hiding. Dana wonders about someone like Willard being found in a dingy photo lab, and that'll raise questions, and Reed admits that it's just a backup plan. The real plan is for Jim's brakes to fail on his way there. Reed and Farrell head away, and Dana calls Jim to relay the information, but before she can get to the details, Hecker comes up behind her and knocks her out with ether. Paris comes up to the apartment and finds evidence of the struggle in an open window to the fire escape, as well as a patch from Duke's garage, which I guess was ripped off of Hecker's coveralls, alerting Jim and recruiting Barney for backup. Duke doesn't know where Hecker lives, but allows Paris and Barney to check out his stuff. Dana wakes up at Hecker's place, where he just continues to stare at her weirdly and says, "It's good to have you back, Marlene." Dana notices newspaper clippings on the wall, indicating that Hecker actually killed Marlene, and realizes that she is in big trouble. Looking around and trying to figure out some way to get out or use a phone, playing along as Marlene to buy some time. She tells Hecker that she was going to go and meet a friend and should call her to call it off, but this upsets a clearly jealous Hecker, who says, "I don't like you talking to other people." Dana then suggests that Hecker go get some stuff for her to cook. but Hecker already has stuff in his fridge, so Dana is quite stuck on kitchen duty. Reed and Farrell arrive at the weapons center, with Farrell sabotaging Jim's car, and Reed takes Jim to the empty weapons lab for the theft, and then tells Jim to follow him to the photo lab, readying his device. Paris finds a small bottle from a pharmacy in town among Hecker's stuff. Barney finds some of Hecker's fingerprints. The old pharmacist does his best to check his spotty records, finally finds the address, with Paris and Barney dashing out as soon as he reads it. Dana is smartly able to get Hecker close to the oven for a taste of the food, and then causes the oil to get in his face so she can dash out the door. Hecker chases her, but is taken out by Barney. Dana dashes back for the phone to call and warn Jim, who bails from the car before it goes off a cliff, satisfying Reed and Farrell, who head away. Mission accomplished. I'm going to give this episode a grade of a C-. I think it's kind of on the border of the C- and D+, but I'll go with C-. Start with the good. The good is this is yet another great role, I feel, for Leslie Warren. She's, again, right vibe for her as, a young secretary who, falls afoul of this psychopath, and she plays the role really, really well. I think she had a really good outing in this one. The guest stars are also really, really good. John Beck as John Hecker. He's a very prolific actor. He's been in all sorts of things over the years. He fills the role really well. David Shiner returns as James Reed, and he's always good when he's on the show. So certainly I don't have a problem there. Another good thing is I like the scene at the photo lab where Barney gets trapped, and Willie actually has to use his strength. The whole deal with setting up that fire trap was kind of neat. Willie is actually doing what he is, he's actually doing what it says on the tin. He's being the big guy, the strong guy for the IMF. And it's quite rare over the years, if you think about it, that Willie has really been called on for his strength. So that's actually kind of refreshing to me. Moving on to what's not so good. When I did my previous write-up ranking the episodes, this is what I wrote, okay? Going back a little while. About this episode. This is another episode which is based on a decent idea, so I wrote, but I feel that it's not really paced well. And the action feels schizophrenically all over the place. We seem to be jumping from scene to scene and plot to subplot with abrupt changes in tone and pace, much more haphazardly than usual. David Shiner as Reed is not completely wasted, but not used well. Excellent job by a young John Beck as a psycho who takes a liking to Dana as a reincarnation of the old girlfriend he murdered, but the subplot inclusion has absolutely nothing to do with the main mission and just seems like a way to hide the fact that the main plot wasn't enough to fill the hour. I'm going to walk back that sentiment a little bit. Not completely, but a little bit. I do feel that the subplot was a way to fill the hour. However, the action in this episode is not as disjointed as I originally remembered. Rewatching it for the purposes of, creating the recap, I could see that instead of just being like two different plots or a plot and a somewhat completely unrelated subplot, it's not as disjointed, quite as disjointed as I originally believed. They are very, very loosely linked only because Dana has that key piece of information that Jim needs. So, I do stand by that somewhat. There really isn't enough to fill the hour with the main plot. One of the reasons for that is that this is a plot where there's no new ground covered. You would not watch this and say that, this is something I've never seen from Mission Impossible anymore. No, this is the sort of plot or mission that would normally be old hat for the IMF, right? Just convince somebody that he's got something and mislead him basically. So that's really the problem. And again, I think the writers went with the idea of, let's use that sort of plot, but put a different kind of spin on it. I get that. No harm in trying. But honestly, it reminds me of some of the plots from back in season 1, where, I commented a lot about how things were very, very experimental at that point. And I commented about many episodes that I get it was experimental, but it doesn't mesh well together for me. And here it only meshes together somewhat marginally. It's really right on the borderline of being completely disjointed and is really, really, really close to that. Another thing that I didn't like here, first of all, there's not a lot of rewatch value to this one. Once you see how it unfolds, I don't know. I can't see myself wanting to go back and say to myself, boy, I really want to watch that one again. That was really, really entertaining. It was fine, but it's not something that I would want to. I simply just wouldn't. I didn't fall in love with the episode. Let's put it that way. Another problematic thing for me here, kind of in the vein of things that I've been saying over the last few episodes. In this one, Paris as Leonard is really just a bystander. It's really just a shame. Like normally, ironically, Willie would fill that kind of role. If you think back to the way things were in Homecoming from earlier this season, both Paris and Willie in that episode had very, very, marginal roles in that episode. Here, it's almost like their roles are kind of reversed. Normally, you would have Willie filling the most minor role, and most of the time he would just say, right, Jim. It's kind of a running gag. But this time, Willie actually gets a bit more of an active role. He has to be involved with what Barney is doing and kind of save the day with his strength. And now it's Paris who's basically just kind of hanging around, making sure that Dana is okay for what it's worth. And he's got the Willie role of just saying, right, Tim. And it's kind of interesting how that happens. In the Mission Impossible dossier, I read briefly that the director, Charles Rondeau, who returned to Mission Impossible for this episode, he directed some earlier episodes in earlier seasons. He came back and he found that the vibe was really, really different. The phrase that I remember reading was, the cast is hardworking, but they seem tired. And it does come across. I mean, they're all professionals. They do their jobs, but it doesn't quite. It struck Mr. Rondeau as not being, the labor of love that it probably once was. And a lot of the cast, I guess, I'm reading between the lines here, I don't mean to put words in anyone's mouth, but it seems like a lot of the cast, he felt, were just kind of going through the motions. And I wonder whether maybe he's talking mostly about Nimoy in this case. With good reason. As I've said before, he had kind of mentally checked out at this point. A shame. Anyway, we still have a few more just to finish out this season. I think that's about all I'm going to say for this one. Thank you, as always, for watching. Please like this episode review. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and please leave your comments. I know there's some people who really do enjoy and like this episode. I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.